What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Code. Dr. Andrew Fix here, bringing another awesome interview to you guys today. And we've had a few of these guests on the podcast before, other awesome physical therapists. So I'm really excited to talk shop with Dr. Matt Silver today. He has a physical therapy practice called Alpha Project Physio out on the East Coast, Gaithersburg and Frederick, Maryland. And he's the author of this new book called Built to Run, and this is a guide for runners to help fix common injuries, resolve pain, optimize their running performance, and be able to run for a lifetime. So, Matt, thanks for joining me, buddy. Good to have you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Andrew. Yeah, we just had the like PT Biz like kind of the event earlier. We talked about the book, and I'm glad you. Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
my pleasure. I'm excited to get into this conversation. We've got two, running based physical therapists jamming out on this episode. So if you are someone or know someone that likes to run, I think this will be very relevant to you to listen to. And like Matt just said, we were at a conference recently and we were chatting. He brought this new book that just recently got published, and I figured, man, we might as well get you on this podcast. Let's talk about it. And after this conversation, maybe some of you guys that are tuning and listening would be interested in picking up a copy of this book yourself. It's a manual that, really could guide you through a lot of the things that you're dealing with. And I think you'll have fun here. So Matt, do us a favor for everyone that's tuning in to listen to this, whether they've been on other episodes of The Code or not. Can you just more thoroughly introduce yourself to us? Tell us a little bit about like who you are and how did you come to be someone who decided to write this new book?
Name's Matt Silver. I'm from upstate New York. So kind of I guess I say middle of nowhere, but not that I like not exact middle of nowhere, but just it's outside of a smaller kind of large area town, but just not a whole lot of people living there. Um, not a whole lot to do, so I hunted, fished with my dad, and then also was like, well, I guess I could go run. Uh, so got into running that way and was great until around like senior year. I just got a bunch of injuries. Runner's knee, IT band, I think you name it, Andrew. I think I've had it. Plantar fasciitis, just a lot of issues with running. Went to PT when I was younger, and I noticed, hey, it helped. Looking back at it, it was a lot of basic things of, hey, kick your leg
Yeah.
out to the side, hip abduction, squat with your knees out, which it helped. Not knocking it, but once I got to college, I'm like, man, I am doing 60 miles a week, 60-mile weeks. I'm running a heck of a lot more than I was in high school, and I got even more banged up. And then essentially, the whole journey was got banged up from high school, especially in college. Decided I want to be a physical therapist. Went to physio school. Thought that, hey, this is what's gonna help me, treat myself as a runner, but also I want to treat runners, when I graduate. And I quickly realized, like, man, I graduated and I still can't run more than 2 miles. So there was a big disconnect between I went to PT school, learn all these things, and I still had to say how to humble myself and say, man, I still don't know how to treat runners. So I took a really big
Hmm.
deep dive into running form, into strength, into mobility, just how like, runners are. We get injured so much. Like there's got to be something that I'm missing here, and there's a lot of things that make running's very unique. It's a high intensity sport, and I think a lot of people don't think of it that way, and that's why I was injured a heck of a lot through high school and college. So as I went on this journey of fixing myself, I essentially said, hey, I want to open my own practice. It was during COVID, kind of a crazy time, but open
Hmm.
up Alpha Project Physio and Performance, here in Maryland, really focus on treating runners. We've grown since then, 4 to 5 years ago, and around 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I started writing this book just out of a passion project because I'm like,
Yeah.
man, with the practice, we can help people locally, but how can I help even? My goal has always been I want to create value and I want to help people. And the book Built to Run was a way for me to say, yes, I can help people locally in our community here in Maryland, Gaithersburg, Frederick, and Columbia. But how can I help even more people, out of state, across the nation, even across the world? Because it's pretty cool. People bought the book in like Europe and all these different countries. It's been
Wow.
amazing. But I'm like, how can I help even more people? And the book was that answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I think, so often someone in our field, like they get into these things, whether it's a book or whether it's just becoming a PT because we want to help people. It's a passion project. Like, most physical therapists I know don't become physical therapists to become billionaires. It's because, we really want to
Yeah.
see people improve, and we have this something deep within inside us. We want to help people. And I'm with you. I think helping runners get through challenges that they're dealing with is a huge way to help a large number of people because running is so popular, but it's
Mhm.
also such an injury riddled activity that people do. And so many people that deal with significant running injuries self-select out of running and they stop doing it because they don't
Yep.
know how to get through the knee pain or whatnot. um, and I think we've talked about this on this podcast before. We've had a few other like very running focused episodes, and you already rattled off some of these. But the most common running related injuries that people deal with: anterior knee pain, or like that patella area,
Mhm.
IT band, you mentioned both of those; medial tibial stress syndrome, or what many people call
Yep.
shin splints; plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis or tendinopathy; and then bone stress injuries, or what we typically call stress fractures. And then I don't know about you, but I also like to throw low back pain in there. I find a lot of runners that are
Yeah.
dealing with lower back pain for whatever reason, particularly the female variety of runners.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, you're 100% right. Like, and if we like when I look at running, Andrew, if I break it down to its basic elements, like running, like when you look, like it's yeah, you run, but if I'm trying to understand something, I need to break it down. Like I think I call it first principles. I think it's the Socratic or the Plato, whoever talked about that first. But if I want to understand something, I need to break it down. And for me, running is we break running down. It's a single leg hop, an alternating single leg hop over and over again.
Yeah.
And you're falling forwards. There's a push off. There is a push. Don't get me wrong, but if once we understand that running is a single leg hop over and over again, it's a jumping exercise. Like
Yeah.
it's a high intensity exercise, and especially not even just jumping on two legs, but you're jumping on one leg over and over and over hundreds, thousands of times, tens of thousands of times if you're running a marathon. Uh, just about like
Totally.
if you run 1,000 meters, that's about 1,000 steps. Depends on your stride length, obviously, but it's a lot of steps over and over again. I don't know any other sport that has that
Yeah.
much single leg jumping in it. So
Yeah.
any injury we talk about, the knees, the low back, like the back jumping and running is fantastic for your back. That for that oscillation, it's great for the disc in your back. But the
Yeah.
problem is if you don't have the core control, you don't have the strength, you're not rotating the right way, your hips are tight and your back's excessively, arching, because your pelvis is you're having anterior pelvic tilt excessively, like all this stuff is if that's not happening, it's great for your back. But if you have all these wonky motions going on and you have this high intensity force on your body every step you're taking, 200%, 250% of our body weight, that's why a lot of these injuries are happening. Is it's a high
Yeah.
intensity exercise. Like, that's why it's like 50% of runners. I don't know if what you've seen in research, Andrew, but I've seen it from like 30% to 70% of runners get injured in a year. Okay, we'll cut it in the middle. Let's say 50%. That's why, in my opinion, that's why a lot of runners are just getting injured over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that number, like the 70% or whatnot that you just mentioned. And then the part that's even more, and we both fall into statistics, so maybe it's true. I've also seen other stats that say over the course of their running lifetime, 90% of runners will sustain a running related injury. 90%. Like it's,
Yeah.
we're talking about football and NFL and stuff, and like virtually every player that's in the NFL is going to get injured at some point. But like with
Mhm.
so many people that do running, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that 90% of them are going to be hurt from running related things that's going to hold them out of their sport or activity for at least a little while or cause them to alter and modify things. And I love the way that you just described it as being a higher intensity activity and hopping and jumping, single leg alternating, because I say this all the time, but nonetheless, it still happens. Like, I think running is a terrible activity to use for somebody to start the process of getting themselves in shape. I think running is a great
Mhm.
activity to do, one, for like a longevity purpose, and like our body is built to be able to do this for
Yep.
a long period of time. But man, running is so much better when you already know how to move technically sound, when you already have a base level of strength and some capacity in your tissues,
Yep.
or a base level of some cardiovascular fitness, because one, you'll enjoy it more. Two, you're so much less
Yeah.
likely to get hurt. And
Yep.
yeah, but so many times, we see these like couch to 5K type things where it's like we're taking a sedentary individual and we're starting a running program with them. And I really wish we could flip that the other way around so that people would get into running in a scenario where they're more likely to enjoy it and have success with it instead of
Yeah.
one that like almost assuredly is going to lead them to getting hurt.
Yeah, no, I never thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense. Like when I'm when I'm looking at a runner and they come into the clinic and they're like, I have knee pain. Like they could
Yeah.
be a new to running or a veteran runner. I'm like, okay, well, like okay, you run, I get that, but like, what do you do? You do any mobility work? Do you do any strength training? And I mean, it's gotten better. I think a lot of runners are understanding like, hey, we need to strength train, but I still get like all I do is run. That's all I do. And I think, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like when someone says, hey, I cross train, I swim and I bike and I do this, and they're already an established runner, I'm like, stop doing that. Like you need to strength train. Like you need to like I don't care about the cross training as much. I care about you strength training. But when we talk about, yeah, when someone's like, I haven't done any physical activity, I don't have really have an aerobic base, and I'm going to jump into running. Not that you can't do it, but it's definitely going to be an uphill battle with all the stuff you said, Andrew. But also think about the neuromuscular, just the ability to control your body and move the way and having motor control. Like that's something that I don't think is given as much attention. Of like, there's a lot of motor control when it comes to running. Like, there's let alone the strength, but there's counter rotation. Your spine is rotating, your hips going behind you. You have to land the right way. There's a lot of balance involved. So yeah, with stuff, you're just going to jump into running. It can be hard. And I'm not saying couch to 5K programs are horrible, but I agree with you that it can be challenging for someone who's, hey, I haven't done anything in like years, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to go running. Like, dude, your every jump is 200% of your body weight or more, or every stride you take. Like, get a barbell on your back and do these mini single leg squats. Like, it's a lot of force on your body. You can handle it, but we want to make sure your body's prepared for that, especially your tendons. Because, like, I think you talked about Achilles tendinopathy or
Yeah.
tendinosis. Like, your tendons are taking the brunt of the force, and it like, think of those as springs. You want a really stiff, strong spring, because it's going to stretch. You don't want it to be stiff where it doesn't stretch, but stiff enough to where you stretch it, it's going to want to recoil really aggressively. That's the kind of tendon you want. If you haven't done calf raises in 10 years, your spring might not be as stiff and as strong as you want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And, on that topic, I like to think of myself as someone who is very adequately prepared to talk about Achilles tendinopathy and tendonitis, because that's the main ailment that I've dealt with over the last 10 years
Oh
is an
man, yeah.
Achilles issue. And, I've had the opportunity to have many clients that have dealt with that. And for the most part, almost all of them are having great success. Even a lot of times more than me, because they're probably a little more compliant with the things that I've asked them to do than I am myself. I need to probably go see a physical therapist and pay them to give me advice so I actually do the things. But I want to touch on something you just said, because I totally agree on, like, you want that stiff tendon that has the recoil and the ability to absorb and then bounce back with the force so that we can be a very
Mhm.
efficient, strong, springy runner. Um, Especially as we get older, because taking a younger person compared to an older person, like, older runners tend to deal with more tendon related injuries, even more than the younger person, because they
Mhm.
lose the strength and the capacity of those tissues. But where do you think, or why do you think, Matt, this idea has come from, that I recently held a mobility workshop for runners. And almost every time I talk to someone, whether they're told by their running coach, their high school coach, or whatnot, every runner I talk to, it seems like they believe that they just need to stretch more, and their aches and pains relating to running will go away if they
Yeah.
just stretched more. And I
Yeah.
want to emphasize that word stretch. Like, why do you think that idea is so common? And how do you approach that conversation with, with your clients and your running athletes on, well, maybe you need
Yeah.
to stretch, maybe you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Stretching, I mean, there's a time and place for it, right? But like, there's a time and place for it. I remember when I was in high school and I had injuries and I foam rolled and I stretched and it helped in the beginning. And then all of a sudden it stopped helping and I kept doing it. And I'm like, why is this not helping? Because I thought I was going to help. Like, for running, we stretching is there's a big box, and part of this box is stretching, and this mobility box. There's soft tissue release. There's a neural component to this. There's joint capsule stiffness and health as well. So there's a big mobility box. Stretching is just one piece of it. It's part of it. It's a percentage of it, but it's just one piece of it though. When we look at running, there's a good amount of range of motion and mobility, not just range of motion and muscle stretch, but a lot of mobility that we need in our ankles and in our hip. The hip extension, getting your leg behind you. You want a really good push off position. You also want to make sure, like we call it mid stance, when your foot is under your body, you have a good knee over toe position. Like these are two big
Mm-hmm.
mobility things we need for running. And yeah, if your calf is the tissue is shortened, we can hold a stretch for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and over time you're gonna improve the length of the muscle. You're gonna slowly tear it. It's gonna rebuild, and it's gonna heal in an elongated position. Cool.
Yeah.
On the back end, your hip flexors can also be shortened. Okay, we can stretch them out. I haven't had as much success with with the psoas, the rectus femoris. Hey, let's put you in couch stretch. Cool. Like we can stretch the quads up, but that's just one part of this. And if all you're
Hmm.
doing is you're stretching and you're stretching and you're stretching, and you run, your calf is sore, and all of a sudden you stretch it, and then it feels better for like an hour, and then you run again and it's sore. Well, all you're doing is think of your whole calf as a rubber band. You're if you're it's probably it's a weaker rubber band. You're stretching it, you're contracting it, using it when you run, and it's sore now. And do you think I'm just going to stretch it and that's going to solve the problem? Well, like, no, we have to, even your Achilles, like if you have Achilles tendon issue and you stretch it, like that's horrible for Achilles tendon. Like you're not going to take, you don't want to stretch your spring out. Like you want that spring to be recoiled and it wants to stay there. You want it to be a hard stretch and then it recoils back. If you just statically hold the spring, it probably will stretch out. And that's not really what we want for the Achilles. For the muscle, there's a time and place for it. But I think a lot of runners would be better off of if we need to improve mobility, we need to find out how stretching might be part of it, but what's the best way to improve your mobility? It's going to be different from someone else's,
Yeah.
but strengthening is definitely a big part of this. Is yes, we need to be mobile as runners. I don't want to say that we don't need to be mobile because we do. Certain parts of our body, our ankles and our hip, two big ones, but we have to make sure we have strength. And think of the muscles and Achilles as muscles and rubber bands. The Achilles is that spring. We're not just trying to. There has to be some level of tension in there so when we hit the end range, it can contract out of it, and we get this really nice. It makes us run more efficiently. If you're loose, your tendons are loose, you're going to work a heck of a lot harder to run.
Yep. Yeah, I love that analogy of talking about tendons as springs. And, anyone that knows what a spring is, they know that stretching it out is going to make that thing weaker, not work the way that it's supposed to. If you're thinking of one of the more fun springs, like, take your slinky and try to make it go down the stairs. If you like stretch and lengthen that thing out, it's not going to be able to do and recoil and bounce and continue to go. Um, and I love what you just said of like, stretching is just a small piece of this big box of ways that we can improve mobility. And mobility has a lot of different components to it. And a few minutes ago, you were talking about strength training and other forms of cross training. And I am right there with you. Like 10 times out of 10, I would rather take a runner who is currently doing running, swimming, and biking. And they're saying, I'm cross training, I'm swimming and biking on these other days, I'm running
Yeah,
3 days a week.
yeah,
I
yeah.
would rather they scrap the biking and swimming all together and
Mhm.
strength train 2, 3 days a week because I know that what that's going to do. One of the coaches here in the gym, I love this phrase that he uses. He like talks about the gym as a runner's movement laboratory. Like this is your time, this is your place to work on the activities that are going to help build the motor control and build the strength and resilience of the chassis of your body, right? If we think of our body as like a car and our body is the chassis and like the wheels are like the shoes and things that we wear, the tires are the shoes and whatnot. Like we need
Yeah,
the chassis to be strong and durable to maintain its shape and its stability when we're doing the activities, aka running like that we want to do. And so much motor control and strength and stuff goes into this. So though other forms of cardio cross training can be valuable, by no means do I think either one of us would say that that should replace strength training. We believe every single
yeah,
runner should be doing strength training activities.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And I like to it made me think of this analogy. I forgot where I heard it. It's either from Jada Cherry or Doug Adams. So I want to give them credit for it. I think it was Jada Cherry in the book Running Rewired. But it's like if you're going to be this runner who doesn't strength train, you're putting it's like you have this big, powerful jet engine on a paper airplane. Like like the paper airplane's going to get destroyed, right? You have this really weak plane and you have this massive engine on it. Like you have to have a sturdy plane to
Yeah.
handle all that power. And just going off
Yeah.
strength training too, Andrew, like strength training is important. Like you're going to get a lot of adaptation just from the strength training. But something that I think would also really help runners is if we know running's jumping, well, we need to be doing some jump training. And I
Thank
don't
you.
mean you're doing depth jumps from like a 20 like a I don't know, a 5 foot box. I think social media pushes some really dumb exercises of like like we have to get off the ground fast. If you spend a second on the ground from your 5 foot box jump, like you're not. I don't even think that's a plyo anymore. I don't think that's even
Yeah.
fast enough to consider to be a plyo. So like my favorite one is and I think I got this from Jada Cherry. So big shout out to him. But we do these like even for like you could use a curb for this. It's so simple. You get like a 6 inch, 8 inch box or a step, and then you just do like alternating like 1 foot on, 1 foot off, and you just jump you jump really high in the air. You just want to be super aggressive on the ground and have a really, really quick contact time. So number one, it's great for your plyos. Number two, it's great for bone health. Like that's a cheat code you can actually do as a runner is I don't mean to kind of go off these different directions, Andrew,
No, this is
but
great.
like running, we know, like, yeah, there's a lot of force on your body when you run, but uh, besides that, running is not that. But that's one good thing that it maybe has going for it for bone health. But running is notoriously horrible for bone health because bones love to be contracted on, like they love muscle contract, like the muscle and the tendon pulling on the bone. They'll adapt to
Yeah.
that, but also they love to be challenged in different directions. Side to side, backwards. Well, running you only move forward, so that's
Yeah.
one mark against running. But I also love frequent breaks. Running is you're just going for a long period of time.
Yeah.
So doing these jumping exercises before you run, A, it's great for your tendons to get that quick contraction, but B, it's great for your bone health because if you do it afterwards, your bone cells they're in this like inhibitory state, or they're not going to adapt as well. So jump
Yeah.
training is A, it's better, it's great to become a more efficient runner and get those tendons to contract and relax the way we want them to, but also
Mhm.
it's fantastic for your bone health.
Ooh, I love that. And so what you're kind of saying is one strategy that a runner could implement is one, having some plyometric drills involved in their weekly routine. But it sounds like potentially, maybe pending the length of that run or something, potentially immediately after your run would be a good time to maybe implement some of those plyometric things. And your bones are like in this position, they're in this space where like they're trying to withstand, and they're trying to morph and change due to the stresses that were just put on them, and we want to give them the right kind of input so that they can do that.
I meant before the run. Do it before
Oh,
you run.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
So
I
it's
think that's
essentially after the run because you've done it's because all the running you've done, you've kind of like the bone cell, they're kind of turned off. They're like, well,
yes.
you've done the same thing over and over again. We don't need to adapt anymore. So if you do it beforehand, that's where you get the benefit. I believe
Love
it's
it.
like 40. I think like 40 reps is like the prescribed amount of jumps, and then it's just like okay, you've used it up for the bones, but you can do more for if you're training for tendon health. But yeah, definitely beforehand.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And I would say with my long history of Achilles complications, before I knew the things that I know now and the things we're talking about on this episode, I was avoiding plyometric based activities for quite a while because it was aggravating in the moment to my Achilles. However, the more that I've continued to work those back into my routine, what I'm noticing is I'm more and more able to do things. It does not hurt when I'm doing it. I might be a little sore later, but there's still tendinopathy and things that is like healing and changing in there. But the more that I do with consistency, depth jumps, pogo hops, little alternating curb hops, and things like you're talking about, yeah, I
Mhm.
think it's helping a ton and giving me the ability to be on and off the ground very quick, like you said. Um, so yeah, I think at the end of your dynamic warm up, like you go through a little movement and mobility, some activation drills. And what I like to do is like basically the very last thing that I do as part of my warm up before I start running is those plyos, like you just said.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's just for I think a lot of people might have that misconception that yeah, running it's oh I'm not swimming, I'm not biking, it's I'm hitting the ground hard, like it's got to be good for bone health. And I mean I would agree. It seems like it would be great for bone health. It's just because it's
Hmm.
so repetitive of the same thing over and over again, and there's no
Yeah.
frequent break. It's just your bones just don't adapt the way you think they would. If you were like if you're
Mm.
playing soccer or if you were like any other team sport where like lacrosse, you're going sideways, you're going backwards, you're going all these different directions. Fantastic for bone health because you're hitting these
Yeah.
and no, you're going to be walking a little bit and go back to it. Like that's great for bone health. It's just for some reason they just don't adapt that. Like if it's this consistent one direction, just stress on the bone, it doesn't adapt as well as it should.
Yeah. Yeah, they like variety. They like variety. I actually just recently saw a study that was it was an imaging study, and it showed the tibia or the shin bone of someone that was like a competitive triathlete, someone that's just going
Mhm.
straight compared to a competitive soccer player of a similar age. And it showed the difference in shape and size of their tibia in their lower leg. And yeah, it
Yeah,
was dramatic. It was like the way that the muscles are pulling on the bone, like the bone of the runner and triathlete was more like vertical and pointed at the front. The bone of the soccer player was all like a perfect circle, almost like multi-directional pulls from the muscle, much
yeah.
bigger and stronger. So, kind of like what you're saying, our bones are going to adapt to the stresses that we put on them. And I actually didn't even know that about like the frequent breaks being better for like how the bone stimulates growth. It makes a ton of sense to me. Load it, rest it, load it, rest it. And Yeah, it's hard to do that if you're like training for a marathon or something. That's not
Yeah,
what we're doing.
you're there. You're just well, the strength training. That's the thing. You get the strength training in, you'll get that. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm doing 2 or 3 sets. You get that break in between, which is again the
Yeah.
muscles, the tendons pull the muscle, or the tendons pull the bone, and the bone senses that and it adapts to it, and you get that frequent break. There's you can do bicep curls, you can do rows, all these you're hitting different directions. So like that, the strength training for runners, that's where you into plyos. That's where you can do like side to side jumps, like off of
Yep.
like an 8 inch step, like that's where I'd say, hey, you can even do like the alternating forward and backwards one. Now you can go like sideways over the step up,
Totally.
which is a great one to add on before you run because now you get the jump plus you get that lateral direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I'll try to include a couple different plyometric drills kind of in the show notes to this. So you guys can go click on the links, check out some little YouTube videos of these things. Matt, I've got a book question for you. And it's only been a couple weeks since you and I not met, saw each other at the conference. So I haven't had a chance to like dive through the whole book, but probably knowing a lot of what this book says just based on what I do, what has been since this book has come out and people have read it and started diving into it, like what have you noticed has been like the maybe like the biggest thing that seems to be like resonating with people out of this book? Like what's the section or what's the topic that like people are reaching out to you, asking
Yeah.
questions or saying like, wow, I didn't know this. Thanks for including this part. Like, what have you found as people are diving into this book so far?
Yeah, I would say I mean, there's the couple. So one of the big ones is probably running form,
Mm,
and like the drills and how to like start to correct it. Because I think there's a lot of people out there who have had like a running form assessment, and like it might be a great running form assessment, but there wasn't any carryover of, hey, we did the running form assessment, but now like how do we fix it? And that's
yeah.
and strength has an impact on running form. Mobility does. Like if your hips are stiff in the front, it's hard to get that, it's hard to get a really good push off position on the back end. It's almost like you got a slingshot, and instead of pulling it all the way back to your mouth, you pull it halfway. Well, of course, that you're not going to have as much force generation. So I think the running form set chapter, but in particular, like how to fix the running form, that's been a big
Yeah.
one. Um, that's been one. I think arch foot and arch activation was also
Mm,
a good one. I'm a huge fan of that one, and might be a topic also for a second book, maybe in the works. But
yeah.
so that's been that resonated with people as well. Because yeah, just the foot is. I think it's a very underlooked area for runners, and just doing simple things can get your foot more active. So those are
Mm,
probably two big ones. People typically always have questions about mobility and strength.
yeah.
Too, it's also like a lot of people reached out because they wanted to know, like, hey, the book's great. Can you like give me like a person? Like they wanted a little bit more in depth of how can I
Individual. Yeah.
a little individual like strength program, which I just haven't had time to make that. I made like a kind of like a example one of what someone could do, but I've had that question as well. But I think running form with the drills, how to fix things, how to activate your arches, and then hey, I need more detail of how can I make a strength program for myself.
Yeah, totally. And on that topic, like making a strength program for yourself, and this might sound bad coming from me, but I'll try to explain this the best way that I can. And I'm guilty of this too. I think so often we want things that are individually tailored to us in our unique situation, in our unique problems that we're dealing with, and to help us be able to train as best as possible for the thing that we're trying to do, which is
Mhm.
totally fine. But for the majority of people, I do not think we have to get fancy. We don't have to get extremely creative. What we need in our strength training program is we need consistency. And we just have to like do the
Yeah,
basics
yeah.
and we have to do them over and over and over and over again and know how to do them well. And if we do that, that's going to check almost all the boxes for us. And then if somebody has like a particular goal or something that they're training for, like they want to really run this half marathon or they want to run this marathon, or they've had unique things in their body where like they've had ACL surgery or they've had this or they've had that, then we can get
Mhm.
a little bit more like individual and specific. But at the end of the day, like everybody needs to do some sort of squats. Everybody needs to do some sort of like lunge variations. We need to hinge and pick stuff off the floor. We need to push things. We need to
Yep.
pull things. And like we just need to do the basics. And I think that's gonna accomplish the vast majority of what people are looking for. But I mean, I totally get where people are coming from. Like I want something that is for me and not the same as what
Mhm.
everyone else might get. But um, just doing something basic and simple and doing it over and over again is is better than worrying too much about like, well, is it perfect? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just wait and it won't start strength training yet until I have the perfect program. Well, just start doing something.
Yeah. Just start doing anything's better than nothing.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what you think about this, Andrew, but I included in there like sled pushes and sled pulls.
Hmm.
Because I feel like we know how much force is on the body when you run.
Yeah.
Well, you can load up a sled of like, on turf, a good turf, like 200 pounds. That's not, well, I think a lot of people could push it. It'd be challenging, but I think a lot of people could probably, 150, 200 pounds could probably push it. I think
Yep.
that would, I see that as like that relates really well to running because it kind of takes off the, hey, you're not jumping anymore. So it's not really loading as much the tendon, but you're still getting a really good, you're getting that same, hey, really emphasize the push off motion, a lot of force going through the body, more slow and controlled. So I've
Yeah.
done that with some patients with Achilles tendon issues and just some strength training in general. And I've had some good success with it. I'm curious what you think about that.
I really love doing sled pushes. I like doing them two different ways. One, I like to have a slightly lighter sled and push it particularly fast, like you're trying to run the sled forward,
Yep.
or load it up pretty darn heavy and drive it nice and more slow and steady and really push through each step. Um, I think it feels challenging on my Achilles, but it feels really good to do that. And I also
Yep.
like sleds, particularly when you're pushing it for another reason as it relates to running is it's a good way to kind of like axially load the body, like you're loading the force down through the body from like up by where the hands are all the way down through the foot. And in a
Yep.
way, in a like minimal impact kind of way, we're challenging a similar system as like when we're running and we've got gravity kind of pushing us down and we have to absorb
Yep.
that landing or that single leg hop over and over. So yeah, I think sleds can be a great tool. And if you have access to one, I think it would be a great thing to work in to a typical strength training routine.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love especially for someone who has back pain, like, hey, let's get your back used to being loaded. Yeah. And
Yep.
it's like vertical position. No, I love that one.
Well, because, back pain's a good example. I think so many times, right? Someone has back pain. Maybe they go to physical therapy, maybe they don't. Only a fraction of the people that have back pain actually go do something about it, like see a very skilled provider that's going to help them get through it. But so many of the activities that often happen in like a more traditional clinic or more traditional, whether it's a massage therapist or a chiropractor or whatever, so many of the treatments, if you want to say that we do, like the person is lying down, right? Like they're lying on a table doing clamshells, they're lying on a table doing bridges, they're
Mhm.
lying on a table doing letting their legs rock from side to side. Like how many times do in the treatment session do like the people simulate or do the activities that they have the back pain with? Like, are we up on our feet
Yeah.
doing things that replicate the sport or activity that we're having back pain while we're doing it? So, and if our treatment doesn't start to look like the sports and the activities that we play at some point along that continuum, we probably need different treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. We might need something else. And yeah, running, yeah, if you're running all that force on your body, and hey, let's take some of the velocity out of it. Because
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at running injuries, the issue that we find is, I mean, all that force on our body, Andrew, we can handle it, right? At 200%, 250, if you're horrible running form, maybe it's higher. But all that force on our body, if we look at like the vertical ground reaction force graphs, I have a few in the book that talk about
Mm,
like when you heel strike, when you're overstriding, what these look like. But for the most part, we can handle all that force. It's a lot of force, but we can handle it. The problem becomes when we have essentially if the loading rate is too aggressive, which is just
yeah.
it could be a lot of force. It's just if that force happens too quickly over time, that's where a lot of injuries happen. So if you're overstriding and you're aggressively, which typically if you're overstriding, you're going to heel strike anyway. But if you're aggressively heel striking and you're overstriding, like that, the force, the vertical ground reaction force will most likely go up. But also you're going to have it's going to go up. It's going to load it at a faster rate. So
Yeah.
essentially, it's hard for your body to handle that. Now throw in there now I don't have a stable core and I'm excessively arching my back every time I push my leg off. Well,
Hmm.
A, you have this loading rate, and B, now you're straining your tissues too much. There's too much stretch. There's just the tissues being stretched more than it typically should. And now you have this recipe for disaster of, hey, we're loading our bodies too much, not a little bit too much, but too quickly. And you're stretching it too much. This is where it's just like now your tissue's in a compromised position and it's being loaded more, being loaded quicker. But that's just something that is probably also related to running issues, but also like, hey, let's regress this. Let's get you on a sled push, keep your core engaged. Let's learn to keep that stable
Yeah.
core position as you're pushing the sled. Which yeah, just it just
Yeah.
To me, that's a fantastic exercise. If you have back pain as a runner, it's a sled
Hmm.
push.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Well, I know we have a limited time window to get this conversation completed today, but I had a question for you that just came to mind as you were talking about like loading rate and when our foot hits the ground, how and where we're striking impacts how
Mhm.
quickly the load is put onto our body and how well we're able to handle that. Where do you fall, Matt, in this conversation of like striking pattern? And if
Mhm.
somebody is a heel striker, midfoot, forefoot striker, and like, is there a way that we should be running? Or, sometimes people will say, well, that's just naturally how I run. And I
Yeah.
know you and
Yeah.
I know like what the injury literature says, but like where do you fall in this conversation of striking pattern and how our foot is landing and contacting the ground?
Yeah. Now that's like the $1 million question, right? It's like, how are you supposed to hit the ground with your foot? And shelf that topic for a second. We can't talk about that until we fix other running form impairments. Like if you're overstriding, like I guess you could technically overstride, landing too far out in front of your center of mass, and then you could like stick your foot out and land on the ball of your foot. Like it's just that's not realistic. I don't think a lot of people do that. So like before we even talk about how your foot's hitting the ground, we have to talk about a how what's your running form look like. Shoe wear has a little bit of effect on this. If you got a massively built up heel, you're probably going to heel strike and be a little bit more aggressively. But hey, if you're overstriding, we need to fix that first before we even
Mm,
have the conversation about how your foot is hitting the ground. So,
yeah,
and think of that overstriding as like when we run, there was a forwards fall. Your center of mass is like if you can't like try to like lean backwards and run, it's just it just doesn't
yeah,
work. You have to have a forwards fall,
yeah,
and if you're landing too far out in front of that, you just like we call that overstriding. So first of all, we got to fix that. And then we get in the conversation of okay, that's what caused that excessive loading rate. So when we look at okay, once you fix that, if you're going to run a marathon, an ultra, a half marathon, especially ultras, like
yeah,
if you're going to run ball the foot, that's a lot on the calf and Achilles. I think you can do it. I just think a lot of ultra runners, they most likely, they adopt like a heel strike pattern. We
yeah,
call it an efficient heel strike. It's not gonna, yeah, you might have a teeny tiny little bit more of like a loading rate, but like it's negligible. I don't think it's
yeah,
gonna cause too much of a difference there. So I
yeah,
don't care much about that. But the forefoot strike, I mean, there's two things about it. Technically, you're going to get more. It's kind of twofold where you're going to work a little bit. It's going to cost more energy technically because you have to load it and then you get that quick stretch and you push off from it. So you're technically you are loading it more, but you get a little bit more energy return out of it. So
hmm,
either way, I don't mind too much. I mean, I like to push people, especially on shorter distances like a 5K, they're a track runner, even a 10K, or you can do it in a marathon, half marathon, just a little bit harder, but.
yep,
Four for striking is fantastic. We just have to make sure your calf is strong enough to handle it.
yeah,
I've seen it happen way too many times, Andrew, where someone goes into a forefoot strike. That running form might be off as well, but they do it and they stay up on their heel or they don't do any calf strengthening and they just blow their calf up. So
totally.
have to make sure you have a strong calf.
I like the way that you answered that question. You did it the exact same way as me, which I think is so cool that like you and I are talking the exact same to people with different words. Basically what Matt's saying, you guys, is before worrying too much about how somebody's foot is hitting the ground, he cares much more about where their foot is hitting the ground as it relates to where their body is and where their center of mass is. And if we can get that point as close to underneath the center of mass as possible, we're going to put that runner in the most efficient position for their joints, their tissues, their muscles to do the job that they're supposed to do and absorb the force of that forward falling momentum in running. And we don't want people landing way out in front of them because back to the loading rate and the rate of which we accept the reaction force from the ground, the farther we land in front of us, the steeper that spike or that incline is going to be on that graph. And the more likely people are to deal with these running related injuries that could be mitigated or potentially reduced to almost nothing if we have a nice running form. At the end of the day, like you just said, running injury rates, comparing people that land on their heel to land on the forefoot, they're the same. They're the same rate of number of people that get hurt, but the distribution of where those injuries take place tends to be a little bit different. Like you just said, if you're landing on the front of your foot, your Achilles, your calf, your foot is going to do more demand and you're more likely to
Yeah.
suffer from an issue there. And if it's you're landing on the heel, you're more likely to deal with things a little further up the chain in the shin, in the knee, in the hip, in the low back.
Yep.
What I'm starting to view foot strike pattern a little bit more as is a little bit more like a tool in our tool belt that we could use for runners. Like you just said, if someone's running a marathon or an ultra marathon, but they tend to be a midfoot, forefoot striker, well, if they know how to control their striking pattern and they know how to control their running form, we
Mhm.
can shift how we're landing along our run to shift where the force demands are being placed on our body.
Yeah.
Like if somebody's, calf really starts to hurt midway through a race, they can shift their running form to land a little bit more towards the back of their foot and take a little bit of that stress and demand off of their calf if they tend to be a forefoot striker. So I'm starting to look at it more like a tool rather than like one thing that like this is that person's form, but more like as something we can use to change where we want that force to be delivered.
Yeah, that's like a if you're like a that's like the next level expert runner thing is like if you're like a pro like ultra runner, that might be like a tool, but like tool. Yeah, I guess not a pro, but like that's like a next level. Hey, we can if as long as you have the body awareness,
Mm,
you can change the way you run. It's not going to change your stride rate or your stride or your step length, but it's yeah, you could hey if my calf is blowing up halfway through this marathon and you're landing ball to foot, and it's like hey, you should probably maybe change that to midfoot or heel strike to unload that calf a little bit.
yeah.
Um, yeah, no, that was a good example. I like it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I mean, I like how you answered that question about the running form because, that's one of the most common things that I look at. And, we know, and maybe it says in the book, like cadence is one of the variables that we can easily manipulate to try and modify that and help
Yep.
somebody address their overstriding, different motor control drills and activities, like you said. But I would also agree, like getting people to understand in their body the motor control and the body awareness to change their running form and mechanics is probably
Mhm.
one of the more challenging pieces of the puzzle. And I don't think every provider out there is equally equipped to address something like that.
Yep.
I think we probably have two pretty decent ones here on this call. And, I don't think that's not the easiest part. Like it's much easier to strengthen someone's quad and strengthen someone's hip than to change their running
Yeah.
form and mechanics, especially if you're not a runner yourself and like you can't easily relate to it. Well,
Yeah.
Matt, I think we got to do this. I think unfortunately we got to like wind it down and wrap it up, and
Yeah.
in a good way, kind of like leave people hanging and leave you guys wanting a little bit more information. And I think that's exactly what this book is for. But then honestly, if you guys that are listening to this have questions that have come up or topics or ideas out of this running conversation that you want to dive more deeply into, man, please just let me know that and we could get another podcast out on that topic, or we could respond to your questions and comments and make sure you get your questions answered. But Matt, if somebody wants to pick up the book or if somebody wants to be able to get in touch with you, what's the best way for these folks to get in contact with you online or find where to pick up this book, Built to Run?
Yeah. You can get it on Amazon. Like type in built to run. It should pop right up. But I highly recommend you get it from us directly. We ship to, I mean, as long as it's in the US, we ship to the US. If you're outside of the country, you're probably better off getting it on Amazon. But if you're in the US, it might take a day or two longer to get to you, but we ship them all across the US. I would type in Alpha Project Physio, built to run, and it should be like the one of the top two links. You can buy from us. We also give you a free gift along with the book, so you get we give you a little something special for getting the book from us. This is just as a thank you. I also sign every copy. I can't sign them on Amazon, so you'll get a signed copy as well if you get it from us. But yeah, that's a great way to get the book. And if you have any questions about running form or treating runners, anything like this, feel free to reach out to me, Matt, at Alpha Project Physio, and Physio is Phyzio. Again, you can reach out to me at Matt at alphaprojectphysio.com. Again, that's Phyzio for the physio.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, as I already said at the beginning, I think Matt's a super high quality provider. Anybody on the East Coast, like I'm referring them over to you, man. If we've got some runners over there, and I know running is one of those sports where people like to travel to go do these races. So if you find yourself doing a race
Yeah.
anywhere near Baltimore, go hit up Matt and check out his practice. Who knows? Maybe he'll be working a tent and a table at one of those races or something, or running it with you. So,
Yeah.
um,
There's Marine Corps, there's there's the big 50K. I think at JFK, it's a big 50K
ooh.
close to us. So yeah, a lot of big races around Maryland.
Awesome, awesome. Well, again, man, I really appreciate you carving out the time to hop on here. And we were talking a little bit off the air. I look forward to seeing some pictures and videos of you not too long from now doing some stroller runs and
Yeah.
pushing the little baby around. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me and having this conversation, Matt.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on, Andrew.
All right, guys, for all of you that tuned in to listen to us on the code today, whether it was your first episode or whether you've been here for like over 100 that we have so far, I really appreciate your time. And if you have listened to them before, you've heard me say this. The reviews on this podcast can be extremely helpful to help us get this out into more people's eyes and ears so that they can hear this information from people like Matt and all the other awesome interviews we've got. So whatever podcast platform you're listening on, if you haven't done so already, please scroll to the review section, drop 5 stars on there, and maybe drop a comment about, some of the things that you're liking. And we would really, really appreciate that. And we hope to catch you guys all on the next episode of The Code. We'll see you later.